Hey guys, welcome back again. It's still May 7th of 2020, and I want to do a video that's going to be a little bit different today. I actually debated with myself for a couple days whether or not to make this video, but I feel compelled to, as I began experiencing a number of strange things in relation to what I began exploring. In the first minute here, I just want to point out the channel of Dan Barrett. And he, along with Zach Hubbard, those were essentially the first two Gematria channels that I began watching when I first learned about this study. And Dan always had a different angle on things, for the most part, mentioning all these organic synchronicities. And to the layman who just comes across his work, they may think this is madness, but it's very clear to see that this man is on quite the path, and fortunately, he too is writing a book. And again, this channel is linked down in the description below, and he took a break from the book and made a video on more synchronicity that he's been having. And it kind of inspired me to go ahead and do this video and talk a little bit about not just synchronicity that's been happening to me recently, but also some of the synchronicity that launched me into this whole study of Gematria in the first place. And it's been several years now since I've been making videos. I started in December of 2016. So we're going on 3.5, 4 years now. And what propelled me was an event that happened in early November of 2016. Had this not occurred, I might not have bothered getting all the way into Gematria and really going all out and teaching it. But this is something that, a lot of time has passed. Most of the wounds have healed. And it's difficult for me to share this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it because I would feel like I wouldn't be doing Gematria justice if I only shared the things coming out of the media. There's so much more going on in this world than just this numerology that we're experiencing through the news and with these, pandemics. And I just want to spend some time talking about this. And I'll start talking about the synchronicity that's been happening recently. And just kind of like an outlandish theory I have about coronavirus that I don't necessarily believe, but if there's anything we know, it's that we don't know the truth when it comes to these events. So I'm going to talk about this and then kind of ease into the story about what got me into Gematria. Some of you might be familiar with this story. I have a blog post on it, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in depth. And it actually won't be easy for me to discuss. It's probably going to be difficult, but again, this is something I feel like I need to share since to me it's just as important as everything else that we're talking about. So, a couple days ago, I made this post on just amusing about the truth of COVID-19. And, I've been going through a significant amount of stress, like I'm sure many of you are, through this. And I've been very fortunate. I'm still working. I'm not being affected in that way. But to see what's happening in the world and also to see the reactions of the people that I know and love to what's happening in the world has been very difficult. And, I don't necessarily fear anything that I see, but I fear the acquiescence that I'm seeing in people, and it's got me a little worried about the future. So in order to mend this, lately I've been trying to get back into meditation a little bit. So, it used to be something I was heavily into. Haven't done it much lately, and while I was meditating, something occurred to me, and for some reason the term pole shift entered my brain, and I don't know where I heard of this. And when I thought about pole shift, I think about how ridiculous it seems. I mean, hell, this page on Rational Wiki should explain how stupid it is, right? But then again, Rational Wiki is also a page that bashes my work. So anytime I see something on here, I always tend to wonder if there's actually something more to it. Now, perhaps a pole shift isn't what's causing illness around the globe. Perhaps that's too far out there. But perhaps pole shift is more symbolic of something else, something deeper that's going on. And I can't help but wonder that if there's some sort of big magnetic activity that's happening in the world, that's changing the atmosphere, changing the environment, combined with fear and stress, perhaps people are really falling ill at a higher pace. Now, I'm not going to get into the science of COVID-19 and, how much of that I really believe and how these stats are being numbered, but clearly something deeper is going on. And, if for some reason, there's some ancient occult knowledge about these things, then maybe they knew 2020 would be a year where this would accelerate, and then they could use that, call it a pandemic, use it to take more rights, establish more tyranny around the world. Just a theory, nothing I even necessarily believe, but I began thinking about this, and I ran this by my Discord. And someone mentioned that a pole shift was mentioned in a recent film, and this movie was called The Dead Don't Die. And this movie just came out last year. It's kind of gotten I don't actually know too much about this film, but it has to do with the rotation of the Earth, or a shift in the poles. And this movie's interesting. Not a very high-budget film, only made $15 million, but a lot of big names in it. Bill Murray, Adam Driver, Danny Glover, Selena Gomez, Iggy Pop. So interesting that this was released just last year, first being shown at Cannes Film Festival. And the plot of the film is that something called polar fracking affects the spin of the Earth. And I started wondering if there was any relation. Because in Gematria, you would certainly see a couple of matches if a pole shift or a polar shift had something to do with coronavirus. And I did notice a couple of matches in Gematria, the 133, also a 56 in reduction. But what really stood out is that polar, shift, and disease all have Gematria of 62 and 26. Now again, perhaps this is just a coincidence. Perhaps I'm reading too deep into this, but when I started digging into the numerology of the film, I found it odd how well this was aligned with the coronavirus pandemic. Now, I've been talking a lot about how COVID-19 is a revelation riddle. And a couple years ago, I made a blog post discussing why we could see a big revelation riddle in 2020. And unfortunately, we have this COVID-19, which has the same gematria in our two primary large number ciphers as revelation. This is a very rare trait for any word or phrase to have, matching gematria in two of these ciphers. And of course, you look at 121, the first case of COVID-19 on December 1st in China, and January 21st in the United States. So no doubt we're in the midst of another revelation riddle, much like 9/11 back in 2001. The director of this film, Jim Jarmusch, notice his initials, he's got the JJ, like the 1010 in Revelation. Also, the process in the film that leads to the pole shift is called polar fracking. I found it curious that sums to 220, like coronavirus pandemic. 2020, the year of the pandemic. Also, Dead Don't Die equals COVID-19, just like Bill Murray, the lead actor. Bill Murray, same gematria as polar fracking as well. So again, maybe I'm making a lot out of nothing, but there's more alignments here. The date this film was released was a span of 113 days after Jim Jarmusch's 66th birthday. Remember, Revelation, the 66th book in the Bible. And I believe it's trigonal gematria, where Revelation even sums to 1013. The two main actors, Bill Murray and Adam Driver, who play police officers in the film, notice how they're born 12,113 days apart. And 12 is, of course, 6 plus 6, so this number very similar to the director's age at the film's release. Remember, the coronavirus pandemic, which sums to 113, declared a pandemic on 11/3. And this film came out 303 days before the pandemic was declared. Corona summing to 33. Now, the coronavirus agenda has all been about the number 666. This number is heavily coded into the film, and I'm not going to go through all of this. This post is linked below. But it's very clear that they're coding, the mathematics of the circle, the 666 code, completely into this film. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, but the riddles are abound. So I made this post and I just kind of let it be. I wasn't going to do a video on it. However, it turns out there's 2 more films that came out since, let's see. This one came out in 2006, and the other one was 2009. These films are called Absolute Zero and Polar Storm. Both of these were made for TV movies. And these are the only 3 films in total that I could find that had something to do with a polar shift. And here's where it gets weird. So we look at this film called Absolute Zero, and this film actually makes no sense. What happens is the poles shift so that, but it's not a real pole shift. It's like the north and south poles get hot, and then everywhere within 30 degrees of the equator gets really cold, which of course wouldn't happen in any sort of shift scenario, but nevertheless, the film came out in 2006. Again, airing for television, and there's no certain date, just March 2006. 326 was a big number in Kobe Bryant's death. And I'll explain why Kobe Bryant is interesting to this film. So I was looking at this film, Absolute Zero, seeing if it had anything to do with coronavirus, COVID-19, just looking for anything in the plot. And right off the bat, we see that the main character in this film is named David Koch. Now, if you remember, billionaire David Koch passed away just this past year, right before the pandemic. And look at the date he died, August 23rd, 2019. Well, why is that interesting? August 23rd. Remember, Kobe Bryant, whose death preceded the pandemic, was born on the date August 23rd in 1978, meaning that when David Koch died, it was Kobe's 41st birthday. And in Gematria, Kobe Bryant equals 41. So does David Koch. And David Koch died on Kobe Bryant's 41st birthday. David Koch, the main character in a movie about a polar shift. So I saw this and I thought, wow, now I feel like I'm really onto something. And again, maybe this is just symbolic of some sort of shift in consciousness or some major event that they knew would occur, but pretty strange nonetheless. Now, we look at this film, and then there's one more called Polar Storm, and I'm not going to dig too deep into the story of this because it's just not as relevant, but I do want to look at the date. This is the only film that we have a date for of these 2. And notice how it's March 28th, the date written 3/28. Remember, Kobe Bryant's birthday and the date that David Koch died was written 8/23. A direct reversal. So the actor who plays David Koch in the film Absolute Zero seems to also be coded by the numbers. That actor is named Jeff Fahey. Notice how coronavirus was declared a pandemic 3 months, 11 days after his birthday on the date 11/3. This ties back into Kobe Bryant, whose name is 113. Now, one thing I never noticed before this decode is how coronavirus was declared a pandemic 6 months and 17 days after Kobe's birthday. That's the 113th prime number, 617. And the date was 11/3, talking about the coronavirus pandemic. Also, this pandemic declared 201 days after Kobe's birthday. Remember Event 201, held by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? 666 was the number coded into Kobe's death. William Henry Gates, also 201. Now, Kobe was buried in Corona del Mar, California. Corona equals 224. The corona of the sun will be seen again in the year 2024 in the United States. And check out Jeff Fahey's full name. 2,240. So the deeper you dig, the better the connections get. There's something else I'm going to look at in relation to Jeff Fahey that's really interesting. And I'll jump back to that in a second. But first, a quick glance at the numerology of Polar Storm. This is the only film we have a date for of these two. Now, this film was released 10 years, 305 days before the death of Kobe Bryant. In ordinal, Kobe Bean Bryant equals 135. If you instead measure from the release to the date of the pandemic declaration, you get 10 years and 350 days. So two measurements with 135, like the Kobe Bryant number. Polar Storm was then released on video 10 months and 13 days later, 113, which was 10 years, 1 month, and 3 days before 11/3. All right. So the point is here that these actors, these films appear to be aligned with the pandemic. Everything about a pole shift or a polar storm. So as we know, Hollywood codes truth into film, movies, and fiction, and then we get a fictional version of reality portrayed in the mainstream. So maybe there's something deeper here to this riddle is mainly what I'm getting at. But I want to look again at the name Jeffrey David Fahey, the man who played David Koch in the film Absolute Zero. So in English Extended Gematria, notice how his name equals 1960. Now, how could this possibly tie in? Well, last year, I made a post about Absolute Zero. Why did I make a post about Absolute Zero? Not the movie, but last year, there was a redefinition of the international system of base units. This happened in May of last year. And this post I made was about a story that seemed to be a numeric tribute to this redefinition. And it was about milkshakes being banned at a McDonald's. And that was because someone threw a milkshake on Tommy Robinson. And this story completely by the numbers. In fact, having forgotten about this post and reading it back, it really actually blew my mind how good this post was. And it had to do with, again, the redefinition of base units. Now, before this redefinition of base units, where the definition of absolute zero was changed, I hope you're following me through this. I know this is a little more obscure than most of my videos, but again, this was the first redefinition since the year 1960. The word redefinition equals 196 as well. So now I'm connecting this man, David Koch, and realizing it's connected to this story about milkshakes and absolute zero. Now, if you measure from the story about the milkshakes to the death of David Koch, which was later that year, that was 97 days. 97, a number of death. But the 97th prime number is 509, and David Koch equals 509. So I thought this was pretty wild. Here I had this epiphany, so to speak, about these polar storm films, one of which was Absolute Zero. And then I'm able to connect it to this post I made about Absolute Zero, and then connected it to David Koch, the main character. But what's so funny about this is that, it was Bobby who mentioned that I made this Absolute Zero post last year, and I didn't remember it. Bobby, of course, has his own YouTube channel, blog. I got his blog linked in my post. And he does excellent work focusing on astrology, combining it with numerology. And he often contacts me with leads that end up, being really good poster videos. And what blew his mind is that he had just returned home from buying milkshakes for the family, and he sent me a picture of his receipt. The word milkshake equals 183, which is a number I pointed out in my original post. He ended up paying $10.83. Before tax, that was $9.87, which is the backwards value of David Koch in the same cipher. And what's wild is that this was all the day before a full moon. And the full moon this month is being called the milk moon. So I began thinking that was wild, and then I thought, wow, David Koch. Like Coke. Well, I had just made the incredibly rare purchase earlier that day of Coke in my run to the grocery store. Like, I never bought Coke, but I felt compelled to buy the Mexican Coke for some reason. And then to sweeten that deal, Bobby pointed out that it was Cinco de Mayo when I bought the Coke. And I just thought, man, we both had this really strange synchronicity after I already made these bizarre connections that seemed to just pop into my head, And this was like the second major synchronicity I had with Bobby in 2 days. So the day before that, he messaged me about a synchronicity he had with Mercury at the gas pump. And again, that might sound ridiculous to some people, but, this is something that we'll lob back and forth once in a while to each other. Just whether it's the time, the numbers on the receipt, the price that we paid. So he just pointed out, hey, something happened with Mercury this morning. And, well, we had a work meeting that morning, and to celebrate Star Wars Day, because it was May 4th, may the 4th be with you, my boss put up a picture of Darth Vader on the screen. And the picture she chose was this one, with Freddie Mercury riding Darth Vader's shoulders. And I was like, dude, my buddy just messaged me about Mercury like an hour or two ago. And then Bobby, of course, looks at Stellarium and finds out that on that date was the date of a Mercury-Sun conjunction. The date was May 4th. The word sun equals 54. The life lesson number was 13. Mercury equals 103. So here you have Star Wars, Mercury, a Mercury-star conjunction on this date. So this stuff blows my mind, and it happens all the time. And I don't have the time or energy to make videos about this kind of stuff, but this is the kind of stuff that, like I said, it happens all the time, and to me, it's just as significant as anything that we're decoding from the mainstream media. This really makes you question, the type of world we live in and what's really going on. And so this is the kind of stuff I should share more often. I do enjoy sharing it, but honestly, sometimes it's a little creepy. And speaking of creepy, I want to get into the reason that I got into numerology in the first place and talk about that a little bit. Okay. So, here's what sparked everything for me. Back in 2016, the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. Hadn't happened in 108 years. Now, I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, just on the other side of the border from Chicago. So I was kind of raised to hate the Cubs, but in all honesty, because the Brewers were in the American League when I was really young, so the Cubs were in another league. They were doing their own thing, and I could still watch them on TV. They were kind of these lovable losers. And even though I always pretended to really hate them, like I kind of had a soft spot for the Cubs. I don't know why, right? Well, then 2016 rolled around, and at this point I started looking at numerology, and I found Zach Hubbard's channel, along with Dan Barron's. And I started to kind of poke around myself because I wasn't happy with the tools that I saw online, so I made my own calculator in Excel, started doing my own studying and research, and realized that there was definitely something to this. And granted, I wasn't the only one, but, my methodology was kind of abstract, I suppose. A lot of it had to do with the two ties in the NFL that same season, because tie equals 114. I think Major League Baseball equals 1140. And to me, there was some sort of riddle with the NFL and baseball, and I started putting it together. And again, we had a lot of people decoding, so I had some help. But one day at work, I was at a lunch, and people were asking me about the Cubs in the World Series, and hey, do you think they're going to win it? And I was like, actually, I do. And they said, really? I said, yeah. In fact, I think the Cubs are going to lose one more game, so they go down 3-1. Then they're going to win 3 in a row, and Game 7 will be in extra innings, and Kyle Schwarber will score the winning run. Now, that prediction almost completely perfectly came true. Now, although Kyle Schwarber did not score the winning run, he did get on base in the 10th inning of that game, and the pinch runner who replaced him scored the go-ahead run. So I was pretty close. And I remember watching that game unfold live, and it was blowing my mind how perfectly everything was. At the time, I was in the mindset that everything is completely scripted and fake and rigged, but the types of plays they were pulling off under these circumstances were amazing. You had a home run that hit the camera in the outfield. You had a wild pitch that bounced perfectly to the point where the guy just missed getting thrown out at the plate. All these things lined up so perfectly, and I just thought, man, it feels like there's something more going on. This isn't just people rigging a baseball game. There's definitely something more happening. So I went to work the next day after the Cubs won, and I started talking to people at work who heard my prediction, and they were like, whoa, how the hell did you know that? I was like, well, I've been studying numerology. I think I know what clues are. I don't know. I couldn't explain it logically, in just a couple sentences to someone. So I went back to my desk at work, and I said a prayer for the first time in a good 10 years, probably, like a real serious prayer. And I was like, what is going on? People are starting to listen to me now. I know I'm onto something, but I feel like there's something greater happening. And, I had a very strong spiritual experience when I was younger, back at the age of 16. And I kind of put God in the back seat for most of my 20s. So, I believed in him, but I didn't much care about it. So that day I said a prayer, and I said, you got to show me something. Like, what's going on? How can I bring this more to people? How can I bring the truth out better? And that day, the same day that happened, on November 3rd, which was the day after the Cubs won the World Series, this news story happened in Milwaukee. The 49-year-old Oak Creek man who died in this workplace accident on Thursday, November 3rd, 2016, this was my sister-in-law's father, and he was a father through marriage, but she didn't know her real dad, so as far as she knew, this was her father, every sense of the term. And this is also a building where my dad used to work before he retired. And I didn't find out about this until later in the evening when my brother and sister-in-law didn't return home. And that's where I was living at the time, which is an important thing to mention. So in 2016, early in that year, my ex and I were living together, but we broke up and I moved in with my brother until I found a house to buy. And while I was living there is when this happened. And what's also real interesting is that the address I was living at had this sequence in it, 162. Major League Baseball 162, Baseball 162, the number of games they play in a season. And so this man died, and what I just recently learned, my sister-in-law told me that on the autopsy, they found that he had a serious heart condition, and he was basically like a ticking time bomb. He had bypass surgery several years prior to this accident. They said if this accident didn't kill him, he may have very well died at any time. Now, the details surrounding this are really what opened my eyes up, and it took me a while to really understand what was going on here, but again, this is the story that really propelled me into Gematria, and I think it's time for me to share it. So here's what happened. Let me see if I can actually find video of this. This might be difficult to find, but here's a picture of it. I can at least get this. This is an image from the newspaper, and I believe this is Sean. Yeah, that's him right there on the right. So this was the hammer that he was operating at Laddish. You see Laddish, that's their name right there. This is like, it's either the largest or one of the largest industrial hammers in the world. So this thing comes down and it, molds steel. So, again, this feels odd to share, but got to do it. So what happened in this accident is that this hammer got stuck. Or I think what happened is that some of the steel on the bottom part of this got stuck to the top part of it. So when the top of this hammer goes back up, the steel is still stuck and they got to find a way to chalk it off. So if they're unable to use one of their hand tools to do that, they'll wheel in a giant ring. And so what they did is they took a steel ring from the wall of the warehouse, and this steel ring was kind of cold. I guess it was too cold to really use for this purpose. So they wheel the steel ring under the hammer between it. This hammer comes down, and it hits the steel ring until whatever material is stuck to the top part of it falls off. I guess that's the method they use a lot of the time. And there were a lot of dangers about this. Sean himself had voiced concern. He said, I think his quote was, "It's going to take someone dying around here before you guys improve the safety measures." So while this was happening, this hammer struck the steel ring. The steel ring broke. A piece of it flew sideways, hitting Sean and actually sending him into a couple of other people. I think someone else had to go to the hospital as well. And fortunately, he had no pain. He died instantly, according to everyone involved. And there were many witnesses to this. My dad even showed me a picture of the aftermath when the cop car had pulled in. And that all happened the same day, November 3rd, the day that I asked for a sign. And I thought, man, how bizarre is that? And then I started to put it together later. And on his urn, I never found out his middle name, but notice how it's always listed as Sean M. Day. This is how it was on his obituaries, on the news, on his urn. And notice how the name Sean M. Day equals 108. And that same day, the Cubs had broken their 108-year curse. And what freaks me out about this is that when you think of the Cubs logo, you have the C, and then there's the part that's missing from the C. And it sounds bizarre and it's weird to say, but the manner in which this man died, you had a steel ring that broke off, so it ended up looking like a C with that piece out. I mean, call it weird, call it crazy. There's a lot more numerology here that I'm not going to get into. His birthday was, the date leaving 33 days in the year, among other things, but his name also equals 45, like Cubs, 45. And something struck me, I realized, wow, okay, I got serious. I asked for a sign. I wanted to see how I could help. And this is what happens that same day. And I said, okay, there's something deeper going on here. And this is when I started really working hard and reaching out. I think when I first reached out to Zach, I told him this story. And of course, he didn't reply. I mean, he's a very busy guy. I didn't expect him to. It wasn't until I called into the Gematria effect, displaying my database capabilities, where, people began turning their heads. And then, of course, I had to build the website. And that's finally what propelled this work into the next level. But this is really, what started it all. I realized there's something deeper here. I want to share this part of it as well. And, most of my videos are about exposing the cabal, so to speak, and this fake news media that's being used to control people's lives. Last year, it's funny, a girl I was seeing asked me a question. She said, what is your greatest fear in life? And I think hers was something along the lines of, not finding someone before she died. But for me, I told her my greatest fear is that people will be living in fear. And that was, obviously a year before this pandemic started. I mean, I saw where this was all headed. And I'm trying to dispel that fear and, decoding the news and explaining how people are being sacrificed by this code. Those are the types of things that make people turn their heads. But we need to understand why this language is so significant to the occult. And to me, I mean, Gematria, according to what I've been looking at, is really the language of the creator. And those in control are using that language, mimicking it as a form of mind control over the masses. And, again, it wasn't until I turned this language on myself where I began realizing that. My name equaling 142, just like Gematria. When I was born, the sun was at 74, Saturn was at 233. My first name even equals numbers, and then my last name equals letters. So I've never really shared this story in a video. I've had this post up on my blog forever, but with all that's been going on lately, I thought now would be a good time to kind of take another look at this and, just bring it back into the open and talk about it a little bit. Oh, I see Zach's in on the chat. What's up, Zach? Yeah, dude, I mean, this was years and years ago. I don't expect you to remember it. But sorry, I'll bring up the chat here. Oh, man. But it was really bizarre. And like I said, that whole Cubs game, watch Game 7. I mean, it was really fascinating. It's hard for me to imagine that these games aren't rigged. I mean, for goodness sake, the rain delay was even by the numbers. But how they're rigging these games is still fascinating to me, and I hope one day we get a little bit closer to that truth. But again, as far as why Gematria is important, I think there's a deep understanding that this world is manifesting by this code of letters and numbers, but not just that, also by symbols. And that's why I think, this whole idea that maybe the Cubs logo was responsible in this event, or a shape similar to it was involved. Ugh. So, not sure what else to say. I mean, that's kind of as weird as it gets here on this channel. It's a real rabbit hole when you look at this stuff, but, everything is truly connected. I really believe that. And whether you're having synchronicities with news stories or celebrities, I don't know exactly what's really happening. And yeah, I mean, it's hilarious almost how coded Zach is by this as well. I mean, dude was born on the date of the coldest temperature ever recorded. He's got so many of the same alignments with his parents. Lord knows, I mean, it's pretty awesome. And it's a little bit comforting, honestly, because when you see all the fear and propaganda and terror that the media is trying to propel on us, it's good to know that there's something greater going on behind that. Because I don't think it's all malicious. You got to believe that at some point, something good can come from this absolute travesty that we're experiencing in society right now. But I mean, if anything good has come from it, I guess in most places, at least here in Milwaukee, a lot of people are pushing back against the idea of mandatory masks in stores, which I think is great. Me personally, I have asthma, so I have a doctor's reasoning not to wear it. But I don't want to be in a store that requires it, even if I have an excuse not to wear one, because now I have to deal with all the other shoppers looking at me like a leper, and that's an uncomfortable shopping experience that we shouldn't be subjected to. All this stuff is a joke. And what happens when you sneeze into your own mask or cough into your own mask? Talk about risk of infection. It's going up way more than the odds of you saving yourself from a deadly coronavirus, which is just a wild idea to begin with. And since when did cold and flu sufferers ever be told to wear a mask in the first place? if it's so dangerous. And they're like, oh, well, you could cough on something. It's like, I never cough into into people or into the air anyways. I'm always coughing in my sleeve, even before this. So it's all about getting people to accept more and more bullshit, clearly. So with this story that I just talked about, and my sister's father passing away by this code, I want to point out a really interesting story that someone mentioned to me from 1998. And I really genuinely wonder, based on what I just shared and how the symbols, the symbolism of this death and the basic gematria stands out. Is this something that could have actually happened for real, or was this just a clever numeric riddle by the news? But considering that me personally, I know that we can see real life riddles play out through numbers and symbols that are completely natural with witnesses. This has happened in my own life. Is it possible this is happening elsewhere? So let's just take a look at this story. It's really interesting. It's about Doug Miller. Now, Doug Miller played in the NFL for just 2 seasons, 23 games. He played his entire career with the San Diego Chargers. And the highlight of his career is that he played in Super Bowl 29, which is the only Super Bowl the Chargers have ever reached. Now, the San Diego Chargers have a lightning bolt on their helmet. So this is what Doug Miller wore throughout his entire career in the NFL. Well, after his retirement in 1998, he died after being struck by lightning. So let's start off with this full man, or this name's, oh geez. Let me take a breath here. Let's start with this man's full name, Gematria. Now, the first thing that stuck out to me was the 283. This is a number I teach about. 666 equals 2083. Remember, 666, a number connected to the moon, which equals 283. Now, Douglas Miller died on July 21st. And July 21st, not only is that Zach's birthday, but that's also the date that man is first said to have walked on the moon. So 666 equals 2083. Now, if you multiply 666 times 3, you get 1998. This is the year that Miller died in. And exactly 1 year after Doug Miller died, the San Diego Chargers were 2,083 weeks old. Now, normally I wouldn't point that out because it was a year later, but the years 1998 and 1999 are both significantly connected to 666 because, as I mentioned, 666 times 3 is 1998, and then 1999 has an upside-down 666. And when you write out San Diego Chargers, it sums to 99 and 90, just like the moon, 99 and 90. These digits can also be interpreted as 666. Notice how the name Miller equals 69 and 33. These are the values of both lunar, 69 and 33, and eclipse, 69 and 33. Furthermore, Douglas Allen Miller sums to 68 and 103. These are the values of total lunar eclipse, 68 and 103. Also notice how lightning bolt equals 68. This is what allegedly killed him. It's what he wore on his helmet. In ordinal, total lunar eclipse equals 203. So does the name Douglas Miller in reverse. And the date that his death was first reported in the media was the 203rd day of the year. If we again look at his common name, Doug Miller, notice this 55 in reverse reduction. I pointed out how this is a number of sacrifice, with the S exception, 55. Well, not only was Doug Miller born 55 weeks after the most recent total lunar eclipse, but he also died exactly 550 days before the next total lunar eclipse. The date he died had a life lesson number of 55, and we're told he was struck by lightning, which equals 55. Now remember, lightning is the logo of the Chargers. Notice how the Chargers were established on a date with primary numerology of 100, just like the ordinal value of lightning. Miller died 100 days before his 29th birthday. And the number 29 is significant because remember, Doug Miller played in Super Bowl 29, the only one the Chargers ever made. This Super Bowl was played on the 29th day of the year. 29 is a number connected to eclipse sacrifice as well. And what I found interesting is that not only did this man's birth numerology sum to 127, well, the date that news of his death broke also had numerology of 127. And it was exactly 1,270 days after the Super Bowl. But here's the kicker. This all has to do with the 38 code. And if you're familiar with the Murder by Numbers poster, you know this is the number that's coded into the title of the film. Well, the date that he died leaves 163 days in the year. 163 is the 38th prime number. The word killing 38, so does the word murder. In Hebrew, the word for moon equals 38. We talked about how this is related to lunar eclipses. The date he died had reduced numerology of 38. His name Douglas equals 38. He played for San Diego, which equals 38. And then he died in the state of Colorado, which equals 38. And Colorado is the 38th state. On the date of his death, he was a span of exactly 38 weeks after his birthday. He was also 3 months, 8 days before his next birthday. He also died exactly 308 days after the most recent total lunar eclipse, which was on September 16th of 1997. Now, on the date he died, the Chargers were 38 years old. Notice how they were also 11 months and 8 days after their anniversary. The word death equals 38 and 118. So San Diego equals 206. This is the same value as the word sacrifice. The name Doug Miller summing to 154, which is the Gematria of ritual sacrifice. Notice the 54 in ordinal. In reverse, ritual sacrifice equals the 54th prime number. Doug Miller happened to wear number 54. Using the alphabetic order, eclipse sacrifice is 142. This man, who has matching gematria with the moon, was born 14 weeks and 2 days after man is said to have first walked on the moon. It's also 14 weeks and 3 days after the moon landing itself. Notice how San Diego equals 142? the word lightning equals 143. And if you measure to his next birthday, you get 14 weeks and 2 days, or 14 weeks and 3 days with the end date. A couple more moon numbers in here as well. Just thought that was interesting, but, I mean, I want to automatically call this a hoax or a ritual sacrifice, but I just, I wanted to make this video to kind of explain why I sort of feel this spiritual obligation to exercise caution when calling things murder by numbers. Because as it's been shown to me personally, it seems like this code is very, very real in what we would consider to be natural, random deaths. But nothing in this world is truly random, as it seems. Everything happens for a reason. We're all meant to learn, and perhaps, Sean's passing back in 2016, it proved to be a catalyst, and it got me inspired to make a calculator and a website. And now people all over the world are using it. When I was at the protest in Madison a couple weeks ago teaching people Gematria, I met at least a half dozen people who knew about my calculator and had it bookmarked. A couple people even knew who I was and wanted to take a picture with me. So, to see that happen, and there was just, a couple thousand people there, but to see that many people were aware of Gematria, they knew about my website, it was very refreshing, and it's great to know that, however small it may seem at times, this is making a change. And not just me, not just Zach and Dan, but everyone who's helped share this knowledge, contribute to it, and spread it among the people. Because, again, our overlords have determined that, this is not for mass consumption. They don't want people knowing about this because, not just because that this is the code they use to script the media. Obviously, that's a big reason for it. But it's also because they don't want us to know the truth about this reality, which is that we are all connected to the source. They give us science and tell us we are random cosmic dust. But the truth of that is much more beautiful, much more wonderful, much more awesome. And Gematria is a window to see that directly. And I believe that has a big part to do with why, they're not killing us people who are sharing this, because, I don't know anything for a fact that anybody who watches my videos don't know. Anyone can take my work and share it. Anyone can take what I've taught and apply it. So I'm not worried for my safety. The only thing I fear is God. And that's what's led me to where I am. He's looked out for me to this point, and I'm just paying the Creator back. He's given me a pretty decent life, considering I didn't even finish high school. I got homeschooled for a couple years and then just ventured into the working world and tried to figure it out. But it's preparation and luck, and I'm very familiar with that. So to be able to pay it forward is a great thing. And I get a couple messages a week still in email, and I know I don't reply to everybody, but everyone who sends me thanks and blessings is much appreciated, because that's what this is all about. It's not about just my growth. It's about trying to expand everybody's understanding. And what easier way than this basic alphabetic order, these simple rules of numerology that you don't need to play with numbers. You don't need to wiggle things around until they fit what you like. You just apply it. You look at it. You see a window into the truth. So I hope that message got across as well as I was intending. It was weird for me to share that once again, but it's a weird world. It's only getting weirder by the day. So at this point, what have we got to lose, All right, guys. Thanks to everybody who jumped in. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you sometime over the weekend, I'm sure. See ya.